Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
The Franks Memorandum was, in many ways, a milestone document in the case against Richard Allen, who of course is accused of murdering teenagers Liberty German and Abigail Williams. The Franks memo seemed to seek to fulfill a few goals for Allen's original defense team. Fundamentally, it sought to discredit law enforcement and explain the need for a Franks hearing in the case. But it went into a lot more than just that. The memo explained in detail how the girls were murdered. It also strived to establish an entire theory of the crime, involving a brand new cast of suspects, even going so far as to name names. In fact, it accused Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Elvis Fields, and others of belonging to a statewide gang of Odinists who murdered the victims as part of a ritual.
If you're active in Delphi case spaces online, you might get the sense that the reception of this document has been mixed or controversial, to say the least. A few people accepted the memo's conclusions eagerly and have wholeheartedly adopted the theory that a sprawling cult of Odinists sacrificed Libby German and Abigail Williams. Others are quite skeptical of not only this theory, but many of the other claims in the memo. They take the tack the whole thing was a last-ditch desperate effort to influence the court of public opinion with what amounts to a conspiracy theory. Still others tell us they're undecided. Maybe they're not sold on much of what the memo has to offer, but they do find some aspects pertinent and well worth consideration.
Because the memo is so sprawling in scope and length, we want to drill down on one aspect of it in this episode. Social media comes up again and again in the document. Specifically, citations involving social media posts from Holder and Fields. We recently connected with a researcher named Thomas. He's great. He did an excellent job compiling a memorandum of all the social media references in the document, along with screenshots and his own analysis contextualizing each image or post that's referenced. He was kind enough to share that with us. If you'd like to follow along with his work in this episode, please join our Facebook group. We'll include a link in our show notes. There, we'll be posting Thomas's memo about the Franks memo.
Keep in mind that when we refer to the defense team in this episode, we're talking about Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rosie. It is unclear what their future in the case is. They may come back. They may not. We'll have to wait for the Indiana Supreme Court to make a ruling on that matter.
But for the time being, let's hear what Thomas found out about the social media-related claims in the Franks memo, and what they say about the strength of the case against the alleged Odinist cult. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi murders. analyzing the claims about social media in the Franks Memorandum.
To start off, Thomas, could you just tell us a bit, how you sort of got into researching this social media aspect of the memo, and actually maybe even just how you got interested in the Delphi case?
Yeah, for sure. So back when the crime first happened, I don't live in Indiana. It was something that I heard about. I remember seeing actually billboards, on the interstate with the bridge guy sketch, the original sketch, asking for information. So I was kind of aware of it, but not, following it super closely or anything. Then a couple years ago, I listened to the Down the Hill podcast that those folks put out and was just kind of, grabbed by it really through that podcast. I think, Delphi is a town that really mirrors kind of the small town that I live in. There's a lot of outdoor community. A trail with a big bridge on it is something that, it just kind of hits home, just kind of the circumstances of the case. And then it's just so tragic, obviously, with what happened to those girls, and the mystery around it obviously is really intriguing, kind of to wrap it all up. But yeah, when the memo came out, I, like everybody, was reading through it. It's just really inflammatory stuff, just really interesting, just kind of that crazy, almost conspiracy angle to a case that's already so wild. And came across the social media stuff, as was kind of surprised to find that Brad Holder's Facebook page was still active and viewable, and kind of the same thing with Elvis Fields were the two people that I really was able to look through and kind of make my own interpretations, draw some of my own conclusions based on the claims that were made in the memo. So really the reason I started diving into that was, out of interest, obviously, but then also just out of access. I don't have access to the police reports or the crime or anything really official with the crime scene other than, what you guys have reported and other folks have reported, and that's been kind of confirmed out there. And then also the other court filings. So it was really interesting in that way, just as something you could actually get your hands on and kind of draw your own conclusions about.
Yeah, and you did a really wonderful job making your own memo of the of the social media angle of the memo. And before we get started, I do want to note one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing that's so important about especially the Holder Fields connection online is that is used as a bit of a link between the two men and between almost the Delphi group, or the Northern Indiana group, and the Rushville group, which of course is to the south of Indianapolis. So these are two different locations, but Holder and Fields. Can you speak more about that, about how those two men are kind of connected via social media within this document?
Yeah. So, the connection they try to draw, and I think it's worth mentioning that according to the Franks memo, most of the information they're presenting is stuff that law enforcement originally developed. That kind of separate group outside of the unified command that kind of put the report together. A lot of this information comes from that. So I think it's important to remember that, it's coming from a law enforcement source. So it definitely has some level of credibility. But the link they draw is really, and we're sure we'll get more into it, but you kind of have Elvis Fields, or who, has allegedly admitted to being involved, potentially knows some details of the crime scene that are really interesting, but really has no connection to the area or the girls that's discernible in any way. And then you have Brad Holder, who, has the connection to the girls, lives in Delphi. His son and Abby were potentially involved with one another on some level. But then maybe has an alibi for the time of the actual murders, has no real connection to the crime scene that you can, that's super discernible. So it's a way to sort of bridge that gap almost and bring the two groups together, like you're saying. And they try to do it through the social media connection, but as we'll get into, I don't know that it's the strongest connection or nearly as strong as they purport it to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really is. It's not a side issue. It's a bit of a load bearing wall in this construction that they've made. And I think some of what you found kind of speaks to how solid and stable that wall is. And let's get into it. So I'm going through the memo that you sent us. And again, just want to say amazing research.
I'm super happy that you guys found it helpful, and hopefully other people will too.
Yeah, we thought you did a great job, and we were just like really excited to chat with you because we were just like, internet research and internet sleuths in cases get a bad rep, rightfully so, in my opinion, because there's a lot of insanity out there. But actually, what you talked about, the stuff that you do have access to and being able to look for yourself, I think is really important and is actually a very helpful thing that folks like yourself who are good at research and can do this can kind of help other people understand aspects of a popular case that maybe you wouldn't really think about, or maybe you would just take one side of the story or discount it maybe unfairly. I think being able to go through and actually look for yourself is so great. All right, let's jump to, you mentioned in this, I'm looking at a photo of a man's hand with an asterisk drawn on it, or it looks like an asterisk to me, as a non-heathen. But this is referring to what happened on the 59th page of the memo. Can you speak to what you found on social media about this element of it?
Yeah, for sure. So this is one of the pictures I was able to pretty conclusively identify. In the memo, they referred to it as posted on April 7th, 2017, which is when this picture was posted. It shows a hand, like you're saying, with that asterisk kind of drawn on it, which is what they describe. And they compare it in the memo as a very close match to the rune, the sticks that are found on Abby's body at the crime scene. And so they're attaching that significance to it. That this is, I think it was posted in April, so a couple months after the crime occurred, as maybe some guilty knowledge on the part of Brad Holder. It's on Brad Holder's Facebook page, that he's displaying this rune that was also recreated at the crime scene. Some stuff that I found really interesting about it. So the defense team, and just for reference, I know there's a lot of stuff up in the air about Baldwin and Rosie right now, what their future on the case holds. But when I say the defense team, obviously I'm referring to Baldwin and Rosie. They describe it as the Hagal rune, which is Hagal. They ascribe the meaning of hail to that in footnote 17 on the memo, which I think is on page 30, is where that footnote makes an appearance. They're tying it to some other stuff at the crime scene, maybe saying that hail Odin is the message that's being created. But when you look at the picture and the caption that Brad posted with it, he's got a different interpretation of what this drawing means. It definitely is runic in nature. So I think that's important to highlight, that there is a lot of pagan symbolism, a lot of runes, that sort of thing on Holder's Facebook. There's no doubt about that. But so he identifies this rune as two separate runes, one being Gebo, Gebo, and the other being Isa, Isa. Gebo normally taking the form of an X, which is kind of the base of that. And he says in the post that he's been drawing that for a couple days. And it's supposed to symbolize gifts, receiving either positive or negative. And he's been getting a lot of those apparently recently, according to his Facebook post. And so he says he's going to try to slow it down with an Isa rune, which takes the form of a straight line, kind of drawn right through the center of the X. So it's really interesting that the meaning being ascribed to it in the memo by the defense team is obviously very different than the meaning he's at least publicly ascribing to it. Also related to that, so the defense team identifies it as Hagal, meaning hail. On another post on Brad's Facebook page, which was posted actually just the next day, also in April of 2017, it's sort of a notebook. Looks to be some kind of runic notebook where he's making handwritten notes. And he has another formation, which looks like a kind of a standard H with the center bar at sort of an angle. And he's marked that rune as meaning hail. So a different formation, a different rune in his understanding, having the meaning that the defense is ascribing to this photograph of I assume it's his hand with that asterisk drawn on it. So unclear, it's interesting anyway that the meaning they're giving to it in the memo is not the same as what he's purporting in the photo that they reference. Not sure one way or another what that really means, but at least it's interesting that it's different than what they're saying.
It really is, because you would think that if he's saying, hey, here are these runes that I'm doing, that they would just go with that rather than assigning or ascribing their own separate interpretation. But it's possible that there was some needle they were trying to thread there that we're just not thinking of.
For sure.
But it definitely is interesting, because I know if I not being familiar with any of this, I think I would probably just go with, okay, this is what the guy is
This is
saying.
what it means. And I, kind of playing devil's advocate, I don't know that a separate meaning really means it's any less significant. If you want to see meaning, if it does match, the formations at the crime scene, then that could still have meaning to it. It's just, I don't know, not to pass judgment, but it does come off as kind of sloppy as putting the memo together is like, here's this explanation for what this formation means. It could be very specific to him. It could also be a way of reading it that maybe this formation is not a rune that everyone would use, but it's a very specific meaning to him. But they don't approach it that way. They just ascribe a quick Googling of asterisk rune would give you that information that they put in the memo. So just interesting.
Yeah, and I think what you said is also very important to be devil's advocate and to give them the benefit of the doubt. We can always make an argument that just because they're the alleged murderers are not doing things in a very sensible way from a runic perspective, perhaps they're more self-taught or getting things wrong, and there's that element. Although frankly, in my opinion, I think the memo tries to have it both ways. They're runic experts, but also maybe they mess stuff up. So I think it is fair to keep that in mind as kind of in the back of our heads. Well, let's talk about this painting. This painting, yeah, it's an interesting painting, and reminds me of the conversation we had with the experts from the Troth, which of course is a heathen group that is inclusive, anti-racist. They're great. We talked a little bit about. I'm Catholic, right? So, lots of crucifixions and,
right, for sure.
If you kind of were coming into that totally not knowing anything, you might be a little freaked out about that, understandably, because it's a horrible way to die. Yeah, I guess that's my setup for this. What exactly are we looking at with this painting? If you could paint a word picture for the listeners.
I mean, it's not, I wouldn't call it a very professionally done painting, but it basically depicts with no, if you're coming at it with absolutely no background, it depicts a tree. It's some kind of field, some kind of grass landscape. There is a naked man hanging from the tree by the ankles. He appears to maybe be beaten, have some kind of injury around his face. One of his legs is straight. The other one is kind of cocked out at an angle, but they're joined at the ankle. And then on the ground, around the roots of the tree, you see different discs, different circles with what appear to be maybe characters, runes, something like, in the context of this discussion, something like that around the bottom. So like you're saying, with coming at it with no information, no background knowledge, it definitely could be viewed as a disturbing image. I will say it's not gory. I wouldn't describe it. There's no blood. There's no, nothing really overtly violent about it other than, obviously the inherent violence of a man hanging upside down.
If you told me that this was the nude guy who was hungover wandering through the woods and he got caught in some trap then I would believe that, because I wouldn't, as you said, there's no blood. Really doesn't look to be anything gory about it.
No, I totally agree. And I think your point about, any religion's, symbolism, if you're coming at it with no information, there's a lot of depictions of the crucifixion is a great example that are incredibly gory, incredibly violent, that coming at it with no background, which is kind of hard to imagine sometimes, it could be, viewed as something horrible, something totally horrible. And
what do they do to this guy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have a lot to say about this picture other than that the defense team clearly tries to paint it as a creepy, violent image, some kind of image with a negative connotation. And I think you guys did a great job in your episode with the folks from the Trove about really dispelling that this is a very common symbol, of Odin hanging from the tree. It depicts his sacrifice to gain the knowledge of language, if I'm remembering the episode and the information correctly. So taking it with that context, there may not be anything creepy about it. The defense team tries to draw some parallels between, I think, the way that Libby is posed and with her legs to this image that may have some symbolism. Also, the kind of the rune that's at the center of the base of the tree. It's on the ground. It's not on the tree itself, but it resembles the F. I think that picture is one that's been widely circulated. It was on the news. Everyone's seen that. It was painted on the tree. So take from that what you will. But I think in the episode with those folks from the Trove, they said that letter would appear in every depiction of this scene. It's it's the first letter of the alphabet. It's a very common symbol. So I think it's very easy to look at this and draw no connection to it from it to the crime scene, other than it is pagan in nature, Odinistic in nature. And so if you're going to ascribe that meaning to the crime scene, then obviously there is that loose connection.
Yeah, no, that's really well said, and I think it is important to remember because we are talking about people's religion, and I think just kind of being like, oh, this is so freaky. What are they doing? That doesn't feel great, and I think it's absolutely fine to look into possible religious significance at a crime scene. So I'm certainly not saying that there's anything wrong with saying, hey, maybe Odinists did this or maybe heathens did this. It's more of like just reading. There seems to be a little bit of a tone in this document that's very much like, what are like these guys are capable of anything because they're pagan. And
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's, when you have an image like exactly like you're saying, you have an image like this that is obviously just a very well-known scene in, depicting an aspect of this religion. Ascribing a negative connotation to it is kind of out of bounds. It may have some connection. It's possible, I guess, but to just take this and say, well, he painted this, obviously he's a violent person, or he's he's got some connection to this crime scene, when it depicts things that are apparently very common in the religion, is kind of a tough step to take.
I agree, and I kind of tend to think also this is Odin choosing to do this to benefit people. Almost reminds me of like the Prometheus myth, but less violent, because he's the one making the sacrifice rather than the gods chaining him to a rock. So it's like it just seems a little bit less violent or invasive for him, the central figure of the myth, than you would even think necessarily.
For sure. No, I agree with that. One other thing I have to point out about this, in the document, the defense makes some reference to the possibility that one of the girls was hung from a tree. I think it's sort of a subtle callback to this image. It's interesting to me that they don't point to any evidence of that happening other than, a rope that was maybe found nearby. They mentioned that in the memo. But you would think if a person was, hung by the ankle from a tree with a rope for any period of time, it's going to be abrasions, marks, pretty obvious way to know that was happening. So, and if that was the case, if that did exist, that would obviously that would be something that may bolster their claims here, and be something you would think they would include. So I think the fact that it's not included probably diminishes the chance of that actually having happened. Does that make sense?
I completely agree. If there's a ligature mark on one of their ankles, and that's something to mention, because also that speaks to whatever happening to them taking a lot more time to tie and hang them up or something. So it would bolster their argument in several different respects. Also, that feels like it would be harder for one person to do.
Definitely.
So I think that's a very important point to mention. And it shows you like there is a willingness to speculate somewhat in instances like that. So let's go to page 67. You kind of dug into a video that Brad Holder supposedly posted about a pagan ritual.
Yeah, so this is one. Holder appears to be the videographer in this case, but the defense describes it as a video from his Facebook page that shows a pagan ritual, with the most important part at the very end, where a man that looks like Patrick Westfall appears to be using his fingers to, quote unquote, paint a tree. That's how the defense describes it in the memo on page 67. I watched the ritual. It was still available on Holder's Facebook page. It appeared to be, from the message there, presenting kind of an introductory ritual to people that may not be aware of what their religion is. It was very, very positive from what I could gather from it. There was no talk of any kind of violence or any kind of discriminatory behavior. There was actually a section during the ritual where they asked for any, almost prayers, any groups or people that needed remembrance or strength to be called out by the group. And one man who was in the circle indicated the support for a Native American group that was, I think, going through a water issue. And Brad, who was filming the ritual, as well as everyone else in the circle, gave a positive response to that. So nothing that appeared to, there's a lot of white supremacy running through this whole memo, a lot of, that kind of behavior. None of that was evident in this ritual. So, it certainly is further confirmation that Brad Holder is someone who participates in paganism in some type, but there's no evil connotation. There's nothing violent or weird really about it, other than it's just a slightly fringe religion. The part at the end there, it does appear that Patrick Westfall was doing something to the tree. To say that he's appearing to paint it, he only appears for like 2 seconds. I mean, or maybe even less than that. So it's really hard to tell what he's doing. Since the time I kind of finished looking into this, I saw a video from Tom Webster, who was kind of doing something similar, going through some of this. And I think he actually saw a video where Westfall claimed what he was doing was putting a coin in the tree, which is a really common pagan act. It's something that still happens in the UK today. I looked into it a little bit after seeing Tom's video. Something called like a wishing tree is what they call it nowadays. But so you put something like a coin or some piece of metal into the tree for some kind of blessing going forward. So a very plausible explanation, something that it's kind of, again, it's a pretty big leap in my opinion to take that and then to take that action of doing something to a tree at the end of a 20-minute video and extrapolate that out to a potential rune being painted on a tree at a crime scene.
Right. And especially since it's like, again, the man appearing in for 2 seconds, it's,
Yeah, it's certainly not any kind of serious part of the ritual, even if that is what he's doing. If he is painting it, it doesn't appear to have any kind of paintbrush or anything like that. So I think the explanation he gave is pretty reasonable. Whether it's factual or not, who knows?
Right. And if he's using his fingers to paint, it feels like that could also look similar to like someone putting a coin in. So it's like,
oh, yeah, for sure.
Let's get into these 4 next images in your memo, which of course are the images of sticks taken from Holder's Facebook, I believe. These are a variety. So he would basically go into the woods, seemingly take photos of stick formations that he found on the ground. And seemingly, correct me if you have a different interpretation, but these are things that he's finding. So he's saying, oh, wow, looks like this rune, and taking a photo and posting it. Is that how sort of you're reading this series?
Yeah, I think so. It's not 100% clear, to be fair, whether he's assembling these things or if he's just finding them, like you're stumbling upon them that appear to be potentially runic, and then taking pictures of them. There's no real comments to go with these. They're just pictures he's posted on his Facebook. The one that I highlight in the memo is the F rune. To be fair, it's not dissimilar from the photo of the tree at the crime scene that's been on the news and everywhere, but it's also not dissimilar from, it's a pretty common symbol, it seems to be in his religion. So it also was posted almost a year before the murders took place. So there's no real there's no maybe a building up to that you might expect to see. These the pictures don't become more common or happening more frequently leading up to the murders. They're sort of just isolated to these couple weekends when he's out walking in a park and taking some of these pictures and posting them. There's one grouping of them from February of 2016 and another grouping from May of that year. And I didn't find any images similar to these that were posted after the crime was committed. So what that means, I'm not sure if it means anything. But there's also a lot of they appear to be runes, similar type pictures that don't match, that are not the F rune. They don't really appear to match anything that they reference in the memo from the crime scene. So a reading of that it's kind of a picking and choosing. It's not like he's obsessed with this F rune specifically or the asterisk rune specifically. There's all kinds of different runes, different symbols that he's choosing to highlight on his Facebook page.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because I think it may look different if he was constantly posting the F-shaped runes, and like, as you said, I seem to be fixated, but there are a number of different types of runes here, and just photos of sticks in general that he seems to be interpreting as runic.
Yeah. I think one thing that lends to the idea that maybe he's just finding these is that they're not really placed on clear ground. He's not like he's framed them very specifically. They're amongst other leaves, sticks, that sort of thing on the ground. So, it's possible that he's arranged them deliberately, but it's also very possible that he's just noticing them. They remind him of something that he's familiar with, and he's taking a picture of them. So
it also strikes me as it's when you're dealing with straight lines, it's very easy to see runes.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. No, I totally agree with that.
Now, we're going from the ancient runes to the modern memes, and this is certainly an alarming part of the Franks memorandum, where the defense mentions a certain meme that Brad Holder posted around the time of the murders. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so there were a couple photos, this being one of them. And this is on page 69 of the memo. This is apparently the meme addressing how real friends will help you move a body and then keep their mouth shut. So it was deleted at some point in time. I wasn't able to actually find it. I think we can all kind of imagine what it looks like. We've probably all got an uncle or a cousin who posts stuff like this. I know I certainly do. Just random, borderline inappropriate things.
The boomers love these kinds of memes. I'm
They
going to
do.
say that. No, if you're a boomer and you're listening to it, I'm sure you don't post them. Maybe you do. And if that's your thing, good for you. Have
Go
fun.
for it.
Go for it. But they love these. I've seen memes like this because we befriend a lot of older people. And like, talk to people who were around in Indianapolis in like the 70s. And there's a style, like often Bugs Bunny, or you have somebody Sam's on these things, or like some clip from a movie. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Reading it, taking it at face value, the way it's presented in the memo, obviously it's not a great look. Even if you have nothing to do with the murder, it's obviously a very front page topic in your town. Probably pretty tone deaf to post something like that. So not a great look. But also, I don't know that there's a lot of real strong evidence that the girls were moved. Maybe they were moved around the area where the crime was committed. But as far as taking another location, try to be disposed of in some way, I don't know. There's a lot of strong evidence for that, so I don't know how strongly it really ties down. And then similarly, another post that I wasn't really able to find that was also deleted was a 2 a.m. Facebook post, 12 hours or so after the girls go missing, that says the testosterone was through the roof. Appeared to be a picture of him in the gym, from what the defense describes it as. That's something you could read two ways. If he's involved, if you believe he's involved in the murders, then maybe it's a secretive way of bragging about it. If you think he has nothing to do with it at all, he may not even have been aware of what happened at that time. From looking through his Facebook, he does post a lot of pictures of him at the gym, with captions similar to that. So it's not something that is abnormal behavior for him. It's possible that he realized it was sort of a bad look, and that's why he deleted it later. And there could be a totally innocent, reasoning behind that. So
Yeah.
I understand why they included it. It's not a great look. If you believe that he had something to do with it, you could certainly read it that way. But I don't think my opinion, it's not a really strong connection.
Yeah, and especially as you said that there's a history of that. I think if that came out of nowhere and his posting history didn't support anything like that, that would maybe be a bit more of a red flag. But some guys just like to post their gym updates. Some gals like to post their gym updates. I mean,
For sure, yeah. And I mean, and the testosterone thing, I think they kind of try to tie that, like his adrenaline is pumping. He's feeling really, he's just done this horrible thing, or knows that this horrible thing has happened that he was somehow involved in. But, a lot of guys that are really big into the gym, that sounds like a caption I could see a friend of mine who's a big into like powerlifting posting if he's just hit like a, personal record or something like that. So, that could just be my own bias talking, showing through that. I don't find it that compelling, but,
I
it is
mean,
what
we
it is.
always have a bias on our show for the boring answer. And a lot of these things have a pretty strong boring answer. And that, I think that is compelling to us, although we do want to give the defense team the benefit of the doubt, at least consider them and take it seriously. I think it's important to take it seriously, but to examine what are the other explanations. Is this described in a way that is fair?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's jump to page 100. So this is actually about Patrick Westfall rather than Brad Holder. He's one of the other alleged murderers who is involved in heathenry. And this gets into the activity of actually cutting runes. And so can you talk about what exactly does that mean and what exactly is going on here?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like I said, I was on page 100. So the image I found, they actually they say it's from Patrick Westfall's Facebook in the memo. The image I found was from Brad Holder's Facebook, but it depicts the exact same thing. It's an image of, it appears to be Westfall cutting the end of a tree branch and it's got the same quote unquote cutting runes comment underneath it. So I'm pretty confident it's the same image that they're talking about. But so they, in the defense team in the memo, I think tries to draw a connection between this image and the idea of cutting runes and the stick that was maybe cut with an electric saw. Um, at the crime scene that they claim was possibly cut by an electric saw at the crime scene. I think you can kind of find confirmation of that in footnote 30, where they mention it's when they're laying out the one man could not have done all of this. They say one man acting alone just so happened to have found a branch with a clean cut end on the ground in the woods, and then tie that to footnote 30, saying later in this brief you will see a Facebook post in which a few weeks before the murders, a man that looks like Patrick Westfall is using an electric saw to cut a tree branch. Brad Holder then leaves a comment that says, quote, cutting runes. So they're obviously trying to tie that, hey, maybe this is the branch that was found at the crime scene, that here is a possible explanation for how they got there. But when you look through the rest of Brad's Facebook, there are several depictions of runes that are made by cutting discs off of the end of tree branches, deer antlers, that sort of thing. And so I think there's a much less grabby explanation for this photo, where they found what they deemed to be a suitable stick for cutting those discs out of. They then take those and write different rune formations on them. And in a couple of photos on Brad's Facebook, seems to be carrying them around in a bag, so is able to have them with him. They're stored nicely. He sets them out on, I mean, for lack of a better term, an altar to take different pictures of, numerous times on his Facebook page. So that appears to me to be what is happening in this image. It's just another one of those. Again, if you want to take a super aggressive look at this, you could say that, hey, this is the image or this is the stick that was found at the crime scene. Here he is making it. Boom. This is quote unquote proof. But to me, it seems a lot more likely that what he's doing is cutting that end several times to make a number of discs that they're then going to write runes on. And there are, like I said, a couple of other instances where Brad displays a whole set of these. He shows 2 or 3 of them at different times with different messages, numerous times over several years on his Facebook page. So.
Yeah, that's really well said. And yeah, I think even if it's not the stick, or, you could say, well, maybe this is what they do. They go and they cut these sticks and then lay them out like runes, but that's right. Not the mechanism that appears to be happening.
No. And kind of like we talked about before, there's not a lot of images of large constructed runes on the ground, on Brad's Facebook page. The ones that he does post, they're pretty small scale. You can tell by, leaves and the other scale, items around them. They're not these big constructions. And what's much more prevalent are these small discs that you would make by cutting the end of a stick, which appears to be what's happening here. So.
And I was being devil's advocate. I was thinking, well, maybe they cut the branch at the scene to take it home to make discs, but then we're getting into the realm of like anything could happen. Right,
for sure. Yeah, right. So again, maybe, and there are certainly ways to look at this picture and draw some really negative conclusions about these people's connection to the crime scene, but I think you're stretching pretty far to put a lot of stock in this. But when you that's why I was so interested to look into this, because when you read it in black and white on a page without any context, it sounds really, really interesting. But then once you actually see the image and some of the other images that are context around it, it really loses a lot of that grab. It's like it basically just becomes irrelevant to me as anything that would tie Holder or Westfall to the crime scene, other than just the general connection of Odinism. Like, there's no denying that on at least Brad, and look at Patrick, I couldn't find Patrick Westfall's Facebook page, but on at least Brad Holder's Facebook, there's a lot of pagan, Odinist, runic stuff. So there's no denying that, obviously. But these specific examples, a lot of them, in my opinion, don't really tie very strongly back to they don't present this guilty knowledge that the defense team is trying to portray.
That's so often the case in journalism where you're like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And then you scratch the surface, look into it, and it's like, okay, like
Yeah,
I see what
for
they're
sure.
doing here.
Yeah. And I mean, if you wanted to, tie it to something coming from the prosecution side of things, just, to keep that balance, the the confessions that Rick Allen is purported to have given, I mean, I certainly haven't heard them. I don't think anyone has heard them outside of, the defense team of the prosecution. They could be incredibly damning, or they could be ramblings that really, don't speak to any guilty knowledge, that are just, that may not provide very much, you know, evidence of guilt at all.
If
So,
you're saying like I'm losing my mind in here, maybe I did do it, then I don't think that
right,
that's like terribly compelling compared to like, here's what I did. It really
exactly.
so much depends on the context.
Sure. It does. And like you were just saying, on any information he might have revealed, that would be that he may not have, had reason to know, so
Yeah, I think context details, is it a conversation that's coercive? And obviously I don't really think that can be said because he's talking to his
right.
mom, wife, but if it's a situation where he's coming in and saying if someone's interrogating him, then to me
Yeah.
that's a different situation than, so there's so many things, and it feels important to mention them, but it also seems very important not to put too much weight on them until we know.
Yeah. Until you know exactly, because, reading anything from one side or the other that they're presenting is going to be presented in the best light they can possibly find, hopefully without going over that, lying line. Um, it's going to be presented in their favor. So when you can get context, when you can kind of look at the circumstances surrounding it and form your own opinions, I think that's really important to do.
Absolutely. Let's go into, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the Holder Fields connection. Here's where we're getting really, I don't want to say trippy, but like we're getting deep into this Facebook rabbit hole, because I think one thing that was a common theme of everything we've talked about so far, but like it made sense in that, like, oh, they're referencing this image, we can track that down, look at it in its context, maybe we see some different things. But here's where we're getting into the realm of, I think, what I would characterize as very speculative, because you're having, now correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially Fields is allegedly copying Holder's Facebook.
That's how they lay it out. You're exactly right. And I totally agree with you that if you're going to look for a place in the memo dealing with social media that is weak, that's the weakest and the closest to that, like just total speculation, it's this Fields Holder connection. Because unless I missed it, they don't point to any evidence that the two were friends on Facebook. They don't point to any evidence that they were interacting with each other's photos directly, liking, commenting, that sort of thing. There is a possible connection where they know some of the same people. One thing that we've mentioned a lot from Brad Holder's Facebook that is totally absent from Elvis Fields' Facebook is any Odinistic, pagan, runic imagery. There's not any of that on there. So if it was an important part of his life, or it was becoming an important part of his life, he's not posted anything publicly about it before, or as far as I can find since, in the past 5 to 6 years. It's not been something he has been public about, if it is something that he's involved in. So yeah, if we want to walk through the kind of connections that they're making, they highlight 4 in the memo. One is an image of brass knuckles surrounded by other weapons. In the Fields post, it's knives, and the Holder post that they're referring to is apparently guns. The next 2 are some arrowheads that they're claiming are mimicked images, and then the final one is a single clear mason jar. And right off the bat, reading through that list, you may be thinking, like I was thinking, that at least 3 of those 4, the arrowheads and the mason jar, are not maybe that specific of images. There's not a lot of people might have posted a picture of arrowheads on their Facebook.
I'm going to say this, Thomas. I've posted that same exact picture on my Facebook, and I swear I'm not an Odinist, but I've literally posted. I did an archaeological dig once, and I have several photos of my hand holding an arrowhead that I found in the ground, and being like, cool.
Since we're talking about, let's just jump to those 2, because I think the brass knuckles one is the one that has the most potential to be interesting.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's just the arrowheads one. So they highlight one where it's a man's hand, a hand holding an arrowhead is all that's in frame. And Those two images definitely do exist on both Brad Holder's Facebook and Elvis Fields' Facebook. They're different, obviously. They're not a true recreation, not a copy of the same image. Some interesting things to note about them. Like you're saying, anyone who's ever found an arrowhead and posted on Facebook has probably posted this image. It's literally just an arrowhead lying in the palm of someone's hand. They are posted almost 2 years apart from each other. Holder posted his in August of 2015. Fields posted his in April of 2017. There's no comment under Fields's. Brad's just says he's trying his hand at napping, which I assume is the art of finding arrowheads. I'm not familiar with what that means, but they're really generic. The next arrowhead photo is just a picture of two arrowheads. The one I found on Brad Holder's Facebook is again his. I assume it's his hand holding two arrowheads. Another thing that's interesting, there's several photos on Elvis Fields' Facebook of arrowheads in different formations and different. There's one that has three arrowheads. There's a couple of different ones of him holding a single arrowhead. The one that I could find that was most similar to Holder's photo, he's not holding them; they're just lying on what looks to be like some kind of green carpet. And then and again, these were posted actually over 2 years apart. Holder's photo was posted the same day as his other one, August 23rd, 2015. And Elvis Fields' photo was posted in September of 2017. So after the murders had taken place and over 2 years after Holder posted his. Another thing I found interesting is these appear to be the only two photos of arrowheads Brad Holder has ever posted. So if you're going to take the defense's point of view that Fields is trying to show some sort of admiration of or loyalty to Holder through these photos, you might think he would pick something a little more meaningful to him or something that was closer in time to the photos that he is posting. That's obviously just my opinion, but I think it is sort of common sense. You have to dig pretty far back in Brad Holder's Facebook. Even in 2017, you would have had to go back pretty far to find these two images, and they would be pretty random to ascribe some sort of meaning to or think that he would notice them on your Facebook in any meaningful way, because it's not something that seems to be very important to him.
And here's a question, because I think when people say, well, they knew the same people, and that seems to be confirmed, that's something. I mean, that's like a similar social group. So I think you can have an easier time convincing people of that. Why use this arrowhead thing?
I think that's a great question, because I totally agree with you. Like if they know some of the same people, you would think that the police group that was working on this angle would have tried to run that connection down. And if they weren't really able to develop anything concrete, this seems like a fallback. Like, well, we couldn't really find any meaningful connection through talking to these folks, but here's something that could be a connection. And it's just really, to me, it's just really, really strained. And again, like we mentioned kind of at the top, the information that Fields has allegedly give and what he said to his sisters, that stuff's really, really interesting. And it could be really, really compelling. And it definitely deserves to be looked into. But I think maybe where that fell apart, assuming that law enforcement did look into it in some way, is any way to tie him to the area on that day, any way to, any evidence to show he was there. It's also worth saying, and I don't mean any offense by this at all, that the idea that Fields might have been bridge guy, this is a person who apparently has a very low cognitive function, maybe at the level of a 7 or 8 year old. And to me, that seems like a really, really significant task to give to a person that's functioning at that level. And again, I don't mean that with any disrespect at all, but approaching two teenage girls on a bridge and kidnapping them, forcing them off the bridge down the hill is a really high stress task. So I don't know that would be the person this group would choose to give that very specific task to, if it was a group of people.
Your point too, like I would be curious, like I think there's divergence between the Frank's memo version of the theory and the law enforcement, Todd Click, Greg Ferenczi, Kevin Murphy version. So I'd be curious, do they thread that needle in a slightly different way? I think most of the differences tend to be like the conclusion of whether this was a sacrifice or not, but there might be little things in there that maybe I'd be curious to get. I don't know how we would do that, but it would be great to learn. Now, let's talk about the mason jars, and then let's switch to the
Yeah.
pocket knives.
Yeah, so the mason jars, really similar to the arrowhead. They're, in my opinion, they're not very similar pictures anyway. I feel pretty confident these are the pictures they're referring to, because it's the only picture of a mason jar on Elvis Fields' Facebook and the only picture of what you might consider a mason jar on Brad Holder's Facebook page. They are totally different. One is of an obvious ball mason jar sitting on a table. That's the one from Elvis Fields' Facebook. Brad's is a picture of a small glass jar. He's holding it in his hand. Appears to me to be some garbage he's picked up on a nature hike. He's out in the woods. He actually tags the location that he's at. It's Harvey Preserve and Labyrinth, which I guess is in Logansport, Indiana, is where the picture's tagged at. They're very, very different pictures to begin with. And again, there's nothing unique about them. Even if they were similar, there's nothing about them you would consider unique. Now, in fairness, they were posted much closer together in time, only about a month apart in February and March of 2016. That is something you could say for that you couldn't say for the arrowhead photo. But again, I can't stress enough how different the photos are. And so it's possible, obviously, that Brad or Elvis has deleted the picture that the defense has turned in with this memo. They highlight that specifically in a couple other instances, so I would assume they would do that here if it were the case. But it also seems like they're maybe just referencing directly from the Quick Report when they're providing a lot of these images. When we get back to the brass knuckles one, they actually mention that those images are not dated in the information they have. Who knows how much work they actually put into going and finding the originals, or they just relied solely on the report for putting the Frank's memo together.
That's a good question. And then for the weaponry here, I think what you said earlier is absolutely true. This is the best case for this portion of what they're saying. So tell us about these pocket knives, guns, assorted weaponry.
For sure. So the photo from Elvis Fields' Facebook, which mirrors what the defense described it as exactly. It's a pair of brass knuckles on some kind of. It looks like maybe the backdrop is like an American flag almost. It's not in that right layout, but it's stars on a blue background. So it's a pair of brass knuckles with 4 pocket knives surrounding it. On the left and right, the pocket knives are partially open to kind of make almost just an oval connection around the brass knuckles. So it's a pretty distinctive image. If you were going to copy it from someone else, it would be something. It's not generic like the arrowheads or the mason jar. The problem, at least as far as I could find, is that I didn't find any image that resembled this that closely on Brad Holder's Facebook. So I did find a couple of images of brass knuckles with guns, sort of also in frame, but they're not staged and surrounded like the Fields photo is. Another issue, and this could be a situation where I'm not finding the right picture. The right picture no longer exists on Holder's Facebook page. That could be possible because all the pictures I found on Brad Holder's Facebook were actually posted after Elvis Fields posted his photo. So I'm not sure. There is a photograph on Brad Holder's Facebook from October of 2016. The caption leads me to believe that that's the day that he purchased these brass knuckles, and that date is also after Fields posted his photo, which was in April of 2016. So not sure. Certainly possible that he had brass knuckles at a previous time. And there is an image that used to exist that, more mirrors Fields' photo. This is the picture where they put a footnote in the memo saying that unfortunately the exhibits weren't dated, so they weren't able to verify the connection or the possible connection between the two, which I thought was interesting, given that this is the only set of images, as far as I could find, where the dates didn't line up as far as it being a recreation, because the Fields photo was posted before the Holder photo, which would make it pretty hard for Fields to be the one recreating the image. There are a lot of images of weapons, of different guns, knives. A couple of on Holder's Facebook page, a couple of them he identifies as his daily carry. So something he's carrying with him on apparently a daily basis. And the brass knuckles do get added into that after that October 2016 post, where it looks like he's purchased them. The caption from that image is "Got me a new belt buckle," and it depicts what I assume is Brad Holder's hand holding a pair of brass knuckles. And then they appear in images after that time. So a couple of the images the brass knuckles are sort of at the center with, a gun kind of off to one side and a clip for a pistol off to another side. That could be similar in that way to it's not as staged as the Elvis Fields photo is, and it's also posted after the fact. So This is the one I'm the least sure about that I found the right image, just because it's so specific on Fields' side of things. But given some of the other tenuous connections in this section of the memo, it's tough to know how much weight to give it, if that makes sense. That's a long explanation.
Oh, it's a good explanation, and it definitely makes sense. We've come to the end of the memo that you put together, which again I want to stress was awesome. What are your overall conclusions, having dug into this to the extent that you did? And is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think it's important for the audience to understand or know about any of this?
I think we've pretty well covered it. The biggest thing that I think is important to keep in mind going forward, and it definitely applies to this memo, is to not just take things coming from either side of the prosecution or the defense at face value. When my first read through of the Franks memo, I was pretty blown away by it. That's a pretty explosive claim. They appeared to provide a lot of evidence. The social media stuff was like, wow, they've really got some interesting points in here, and a lot of that kind of sheen fell away as I started digging into it and actually looking at the information that backed up what they were claiming. I do think the memo has still some really interesting information in it. That if this angle wasn't investigated fully, then I do think that's an issue. I mean, there are obviously a lot of Odinist, iconography images on Brad Holder's Facebook page. So if there appears to be some information, from the Purdue professor, potentially the FBI, backing up the idea that the images of the crime scene could be Odinistic in nature. I want to make clear I haven't seen those, so I don't have anything to offer as far as a personal opinion on that. If there is Odinist ties, then it would make sense to look at someone like Brad Holder, who has a loose connection to the girls, and if that wasn't fully run down, then that's obviously an issue. I think it's hard to tell by the information in the memo whether or not it was. It does feel like they looked into him. They ask a lot of questions about how much they looked into him, but they don't really ever say, or to me anyway, provide any kind of smoking gun evidence that he wasn't properly cleared. Even if he was cleared quickly, if he had an alibi that's backed up, it's time to move on. The Elvis Fields info is really interesting, but again, you're missing that piece of, could he have gotten, is he telling the truth? What's his connection to these girls? Could he have gotten to Delphi that day to do this? And I think they try to bridge that gap, like we were saying earlier, by connecting the two. But that's the part of the memo that is just really speculative, in my opinion. It's just really almost out of bounds and really butts up against that line of like, are you really truthfully presenting information here? Does this even make any sense at all that these images connect these two individuals together?
That's so well said, Thomas. Thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for taking the time to compile this and then to come on and deal with all our technical issues and chat with us for the show. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I really appreciate what you guys do. You guys do a really good job of just providing information in an area that can be really speculative and tough to parse fact from fan fiction. So appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you so much. And thanks for using my fan fiction term.
We want to thank Thomas so much for doing this work and sharing it with us. We really appreciated him taking the time, and we really were impressed with his research savvy. Again, if you'd like to follow along with his work, please join our Facebook group.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
There was a time when summer surprised us. when galleries opened minds, adventures opened hearts, and we all remained open to whatever the day might offer. It was a time to enjoy. It was summer, this summer, at Biltmore. Plan your visit or overnight stay so you can enjoy the marvelous works of Chihuly and savor the season. Reserve now at Biltmore.com.